The transport ship Kethvar cut through the void between stars like a blade through black silk. In its cargo hold, surrounded by electromagnetic restraints that hummed with alien energy, sat Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. Her uniform was torn, her left shoulder bore the ugly purple bruise of a plasma burn, but her dark eyes remained defiant as she stared at her captors. The Zephyrians were tall, elegant creatures with crystalline skin that shifted between deep blues and purples. Their leader, Commander Veltar, stood before her cage with what passed for curiosity among his species. 3 fingers traced patterns in the air, and holographic displays materialized showing tactical readouts of the recent battle. "Your species continues to surprise us, human," Veltar's voice resonated through translation implants. 17 of our ships destroyed. 17. Against a force 1/10 our size. His head tilted in that peculiar way Zephyrian showed confusion. "Your kind should have been extinct centuries ago." Sarah said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was often the best weapon against interrogators. But, inside, her mind raced. The ambush at the Kepler station had been a disaster. 3 human cruisers against a Zephyrian fleet. They had known it was suicide, but they had to buy time for the evacuation transports to escape. The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the small porthole in her cell, Sarah caught glimpses of a massive space station. It was unlike anything in human space, organic curves blended with geometric precision, creating something that looked grown rather than built. Bioluminescent veins pulsed along its surface, and she could see dozens of ships docked at various levels. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," Veltar said, following her gaze. "The jewel of the Galactic Council. Here, you will meet beings from across the galaxy. And, here, you will tell us how a species that has barely learned to leave its home system continues to embarrass the greatest military powers in known space." The docking procedure took nearly an hour. Sarah used the time to study everything she could see. Guard rotations, weapon placements, the layout of the docking bay. Habits drilled into her during intelligence training died hard, even in captivity. She noted that the Zephyrian guards seemed almost casual about her presence. To them, she was probably just another primitive alien to be questioned and discarded. They were wrong. When the transport doors finally opened, Sarah was escorted by 6 guards through corridors that defied human understanding of architecture. The walls curved in impossible directions, and gravity seemed to shift subtly as they walked. Other aliens stopped to stare at her, some with curiosity, others with what might have been fear. Word of human resistance had apparently spread. The detention level was a marvel of efficiency and psychological warfare. Each cell was designed specifically for its intended occupant species, taking into account their particular physiology and psychological weaknesses. Sarah's cell was sterile, white, and deliberately reminiscent of human military facilities. The bed was too soft, the temperature slightly too warm, the lighting just bright enough to prevent comfortable sleep. Classic techniques designed to wear down resistance over time. But, as the guards sealed her inside, Sarah smiled for the first time since her capture. They had made their first mistake. In designing a cell to contain a human, they had based it on their understanding of human psychology from intercepted academic papers and captured civilian vessels. They had no idea what a trained EDF operative was capable of enduring. Hours passed. Sarah performed the mental exercises that had sustained her through survival training on Europa's frozen surface and the psychological torture simulations on Mars. She catalogued every detail of her surroundings, looking for weaknesses, patterns, anything that might be exploited later. It was during her 3rd hour of captivity that she heard footsteps approaching. Multiple sets, but one was different from the others. Lighter. More familiar. The door to her cell suddenly became transparent, and Sarah found herself looking at a group of aliens she didn't recognize. They were shorter than the Zephyrians, with gray-green skin and large, black eyes that seemed to absorb light. But it wasn't them that made her blood freeze. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows of the corridor, stood a figure in a hooded robe. Human height. Human proportions. As the group spoke in hushed tones, the figure turned slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of a face she had hoped never to see again. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands, which had remained steady through combat and capture, began to tremble. "It can't be him," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible even in the silence of her cell. But she knew that profile. She knew that slight favoring of the left leg, the result of an injury sustained during the Titan expedition. She knew the way he held his head when he was thinking, analyzing, planning. She had known Marcus Thorne for 15 years, had served under him for 7, had loved him for 3. Marcus Thorne, who had died 2 years ago when his ship, the EDF Prometheus, had been destroyed during a deep space reconnaissance mission. Marcus Thorne, whose body had never been recovered. Marcus Thorne, whose death had nearly broken her. Marcus Thorne, who was now apparently very much alive and standing in the corridor of an alien prison station. The group of aliens finished their discussion and moved away, but the hooded figure remained for a moment longer. He turned toward her cell, and Sarah pressed herself against the transparent barrier. For just an instant, their eyes met across the space between them. She saw recognition flicker in those familiar blue eyes. Saw his jaw tighten in the way it always had when he was fighting emotion. Saw him mouth a single word, "Sarah." Then, he was gone, following the aliens down the corridor, leaving her alone with questions that threatened to shatter everything she thought she knew about the war, about the enemy, and about the man she had mourned for 2 years. Sarah sank onto the too-soft bed, her mind reeling. Marcus was alive. Marcus was here, apparently free to move about an enemy station. Marcus was working with aliens who were at war with humanity. The implications crashed over her like a tsunami. Had he been captured and turned? Was he working as a double agent? Or worse, had he betrayed humanity willingly? The Marcus she had known would die before betraying Earth, but people changed. Torture, isolation, psychological manipulation, all could break even the strongest mind. She forced herself to think rationally, to apply her training. First, she needed more information. She needed to understand the layout of the station, the chain of command, the security protocols. She needed to know who Marcus was working with and why. Most importantly, she needed to find a way to contact him without alerting their captors. The next morning, if morning had any meaning on a space station, brought her first formal interrogation. Commander Veltar arrived with a retinue of technicians carrying devices Sarah didn't recognize. The cell became opaque again, and the door dilated open. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," Veltar began formally. "We have much to discuss." Sarah stood at attention, every inch the military officer despite her circumstances. "Name, rank, and service number. That's all you'll get from me." Veltar's crystalline skin shifted to a darker blue. What she had learned was their equivalent of amusement. "Your species' adherence to primitive codes of conduct is fascinating but irrelevant. We have technologies that can extract information from your neural pathways directly. However, cooperation would be less unpleasant." "Then, I suggest you get started with your machines," Sarah replied steadily. "Because you'll get nothing voluntary from me." But, even as she spoke, part of her mind was elsewhere. Was Marcus somewhere on this station? Was he watching this interrogation? The thought of him seeing her broken by alien torture devices was almost worse than the prospect of the torture itself. Veltar gestured to his technicians, who began setting up their equipment. Sarah recognized some of the technology from intelligence briefings: neural scanners, thought disruptors, memory extractors. All highly illegal under the Geneva Conventions, but they weren't dealing with human law here. "Before we begin," Veltar said, studying a holographic display, "I should mention that your capture has generated significant interest among our allies. Several species wish to examine your capabilities firsthand. Humans have become something of a curiosity in recent months." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room temperature. "What do you mean? Surely you must know. The attacks on Rigel Prime. The liberation of the Altair mining colonies. The impossible victory at the Vega shipyards." Veltar's skin shifted through several colors rapidly. "Human forces appearing where no human ships should be able to go. Human technology that exceeds our understanding of your species' capabilities. Human tactics that seem to anticipate our strategies before we implement them." The attacks he was describing were news to Sarah. Human forces had been limited to the Sol system and a few nearby colonies when she was captured. The idea that they were operating throughout the sector was impossible. Unless someone with intimate knowledge of alien technology and tactics was helping them. Someone who had been presumed dead but was very much alive. Someone who might have spent 2 years learning everything he could about the enemy. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Veltar moved closer, his large eyes fixed on her face. "I think you do. I think you know more than you realize. And I think there are forces at work here that neither of us fully understands." The interrogation began in earnest then. Sarah endured 3 hours of neural scanning, memory probing, and psychological manipulation. She gave them nothing useful. Years of conditioning had taught her how to compartmentalize her mind, how to hide critical information even from herself when necessary. But she learned much from their questions. The attacks they described were real. Human forces were operating far beyond their supposed capabilities. And, most telling of all, the aliens seemed genuinely confused and frightened by humanity's recent military successes. When they finally returned her to her cell, Sarah was exhausted but oddly hopeful. If Marcus was alive, if he was working to help humanity from within enemy territory, then perhaps her capture wasn't the disaster it seemed. Perhaps she was exactly where she needed to be. That evening, as she performed her meditation exercises, Sarah heard a soft scratching sound coming from the ventilation grate above her bed. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. It took her several minutes to realize what it was. Morse code. The message was simple: tomorrow. Exercise period. Northeast corner. M. Marcus was reaching out to her. After 2 years of believing him dead, after hours of wondering if he had betrayed everything they had fought for, he was making contact. Tomorrow, she would have answers. But, as she lay on the too-soft bed that night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she learned would change everything. The man she had loved, the officer she had served under, the hero who had supposedly died fighting for humanity, he was alive, free, and operating on an enemy station. The only question was whether Marcus Thorne was still fighting for the right side. Outside her cell, the alien station hummed with activity. Thousands of beings from dozens of species went about their business, unaware that a conversation between two humans might determine the fate of the galaxy. In the shadows of the station's maintenance levels, a figure in a hooded robe studied security displays and planned for a meeting that was 2 years overdue. The war between humanity and the galactic powers had taken a dramatic turn, but the real battle was just beginning. And, at its center were two humans who had found each other across the vast darkness of space, carrying secrets that could save their species or damn them all. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring answers she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. But she was EDF, trained for the impossible, prepared for any sacrifice. Whatever Marcus had become, whatever he had done, she would face it with the courage that had carried humanity to the stars. The universe was vast and full of wonders and terrors beyond human imagination. But tonight, in a prison cell orbiting an alien world, one human woman held on to hope that love and duty could still triumph over the darkness between the stars. Tomorrow would tell if she was right. The exercise yard on Nexus Prime defied conventional understanding of prison design. Instead of a simple enclosed space, it was a multi-level environment with varied gravity zones, atmospheric pockets adjusted for different species, and what appeared to be a carefully maintained ecosystem. Sarah had been studying it for 20 minutes, memorizing every detail while she performed basic calisthenics under the watchful eyes of her Zephyrian guards. The northeast corner was exactly where she expected to find it, a maintenance access point partially obscured by what looked like alien vegetation. The plants were beautiful in their strangeness, with crystalline leaves that chimed softly in the artificial breeze and flowers that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Sarah made her way casually toward the corner, pausing occasionally to stretch or examine the alien flora. Her guards maintained their distance, more interested in their handheld devices than her activities. She had counted on their complacency. To them, she was just another primitive being getting her required exercise. She was examining a particularly interesting flower when a voice spoke quietly from the vegetation behind her. The xeranthemum commune through chemical signals. Each color pattern represents a different emotion or concept. Sarah's heart stopped. The voice was older, more weathered than she remembered, but unmistakably Marcus. She kept her expression neutral, continuing to study the flower as if fascinated by its alien beauty. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly, not turning around. "Hello, Sarah. I hoped I'd never see you here. I hoped I'd never see you anywhere. Dead men don't usually take evening strolls through enemy prison yards." There was a long silence. Sarah could hear the faint rustle of movement behind the plants, could sense his presence like a phantom limb she had learned to live without. "I can't explain everything here," Marcus finally said. "Too many sensors, too many watchers. But I need you to know, everything I've done has been for humanity." Sarah finally turned, making it look like she was admiring the garden's layout. Marcus stood in the shadows of the maintenance alcove, still wearing the hooded robe she had seen the night before. 2 years had aged him more than they should have. Gray streaked his brown hair, and deep lines marked his face. But his eyes were the same, intelligent, determined, and carrying a weight of responsibility that had always been his burden. "Explain everything," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like humanity's greatest war hero is living comfortably on an enemy station while the species he swore to protect fights for its survival." Marcus flinched as if she had struck him. "Is that what you think? That I defected? What else am I supposed to think? You died, Marcus. We held a memorial service. I watched them launch your empty coffin into the sun." Sarah's voice caught slightly. "And now you're here, apparently free to come and go as you please." "I'm not free," Marcus said quietly. "I haven't been free for 2 years. But I've learned things, Sarah. Things about the war, about why it really started, about what the Council is really afraid of." He moved closer, and Sarah could see the toll the last 2 years had taken. He was thinner, and there was a haunted quality to his eyes that hadn't been there before. Whatever he had endured, it had changed him. "The Prometheus wasn't destroyed by accident," Marcus continued. "We stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to find. A research station in the void between galaxies. Ancient technology. Millions of years old." Sarah felt a chill. The void was the empty space between the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies, a region considered impassable by any known technology. If the Prometheus had somehow reached it. "The Forerunners," Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. "That's what the Council calls them. The species that came before. They left behind artifacts, databases, technology so advanced it might as well be magic. And humanity, it turns out, has a unique ability to interface with it." "That's impossible," Sarah said automatically, but, even as she spoke, memories surfaced. The rapid advancement of human technology in recent decades. The inexplicable intuitive leaps that had allowed humanity to develop faster than light travel decades ahead of schedule. The way human pilots seemed to merge with their ships during combat. "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Think about it, Sarah. How did a species that couldn't leave its home system 50 years ago suddenly develop the technology to threaten galactic powers? How did we learn to build ships that can outmaneuver vessels designed by species with thousands of years of spacefaring experience?" Sarah's mind raced. She thought about the human pilots she had known, the way they described flying not as controlling a machine but as becoming one with it. She thought about human tacticians who seemed to anticipate enemy movements with supernatural accuracy. She thought about the stories of human engineers who could repair alien technology they had never seen before. "You're saying we're somehow connected to this ancient species?" "I'm saying we're their descendants," Marcus said bluntly. "Not genetically, evolutionarily. The Forerunners seeded dozens of galaxies before they disappeared. Most of the species they created developed along predicted lines. But, humanity, we developed something they didn't expect. Something that scares the current galactic powers." A guard moved in their direction, and Marcus melted back into the shadows. Sarah continued her examination of the plants, but her mind was spinning. If what Marcus was saying was true, it explained so much about the war. It wasn't about territory or resources, it was about fear. Fear of what humanity might become. The guard passed without interest, and Marcus emerged again. The research station contained a database, he continued. Instructions for something called the Nexus Protocol. A way to unlock humanity's full potential by interfacing with Forerunner technology. The Council found out about our discovery and tried to destroy the Prometheus before we could bring the information back to Earth. But you survived. Barely. I managed to reach an escape pod with the database. But, instead of heading home, I made a choice. I let the Council think I was dead while I learned everything I could about their operations. I've been gathering intelligence, sabotaging their efforts, and slowly implementing the Nexus Protocol. Sarah stared at him. The attacks Veltar mentioned. The impossible victories. That was you? Marcus nodded grimly. Human volunteers who've undergone the initial stages of the protocol. Enhanced reflexes, improved spatial reasoning, the ability to interface directly with Forerunner technology. They're operating in small groups throughout the sector. And you've been coordinating them from here? This station is the perfect position. It's the central hub for Council military operations. I have access to their communications, their strategic planning, their resource allocation. I've been feeding information to Earth while slowly turning the Council's own technology against them. Sarah felt a mix of admiration and horror. The man she had loved had spent 2 years playing the most dangerous game imaginable, walking a tightrope between discovery and success. But the cost was written on his face. The protocol you mentioned, she said. What does it do to people? Marcus's expression darkened. It enhances them. But it changes them too. Enhanced humans think differently, process information differently. They're still human, but more. And the changes are permanent. Have you? No, Marcus said quickly. I can't risk it. If the Council discovered what I really am, everything would be lost. I have to remain baseline human to maintain my cover. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Marcus had always been a terrible liar, at least with her. She saw pain there, exhaustion, but not deception. What's your cover? She asked. How have you been moving freely around an enemy station for 2 years? Marcus smiled for the first time, though it was a bitter expression. Dr. Marcus Webb, xenoarchaeologist and expert in Forerunner artifacts. The Council captured me after the Prometheus was destroyed and decided I was more valuable as a researcher than as a prisoner. I've been helping them understand Forerunner technology while secretly using that access to further my own goals. They trust you? They tolerate me. I'm useful, and they monitor me constantly. But they underestimate human ingenuity. We have a gift for making our captors believe we're beaten while we plan their destruction. Another guard was approaching, and Sarah knew their time was running short. But she had to know more. Why didn't you contact Earth directly? Why let everyone believe you were dead? Because there are spies in Earth Command, Marcus said urgently. Council agents who've been feeding them information for years. If I had revealed myself, both of us would be dead, and the Nexus Protocol would be in enemy hands. The guard was getting closer. Marcus pressed something small and hard into Sarah's hand. Neural interface chip, he whispered. Hide it. When you're ready to access the Forerunner database, place it against your temple and think the words Ancient Legacy. But, be warned, once you begin the protocol, there's no going back. Marcus, I have to go. They'll suspect something if I'm seen here too long. But, Sarah, we can win this war. Humanity can take its place among the stars not as subjects, but as equals. Maybe more than equals. He vanished into the maintenance alcove just as the guard reached Sarah's position. She slipped the chip into a small tear in her uniform seam, her heart pounding. Exercise period is ending, the guard announced in translated galactic standard. Return to your cell. Sarah nodded and began walking back toward the detention level, but her mind was elsewhere. Everything she thought she knew about the war, about humanity's place in the galaxy, about Marcus's death, all of it had been turned upside down. If Marcus was telling the truth, humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the right to claim a legacy millions of years in the making. And the small chip hidden in her uniform might be the key to everything. But, as she walked through the alien corridors, surrounded by species that considered humanity barely above animals, Sarah couldn't shake a growing unease. The Marcus she had known was brilliant, dedicated, and absolutely committed to protecting humanity. But he was also proud, sometimes to a fault. And the temptation of godlike power had corrupted better men than him. Was the Nexus Protocol truly humanity's salvation, or was it something else? A trap left by the Forerunners? A test that previous species had failed? And, most troubling of all, was Marcus still the man she had loved, or had 2 years of isolation and impossible responsibility changed him into something else entirely? Back in her cell, Sarah lay on the too-soft bed and felt the weight of the chip against her skin. Around her, the alien station hummed with activity as thousands of beings went about their lives, unaware that the fate of the galaxy might rest in the hands of two humans who had found each other across the void. The next morning brought a surprise. Instead of the usual interrogation, Commander Veltar arrived with what appeared to be a formal delegation. 3 species she didn't recognize accompanied him, their postures suggesting high rank. Lieutenant Commander Chen, Veltar began, "You have been selected for a special honor. The Council has decided that your species' recent achievements warrant closer study. You will be transferred to our primary research facility for comprehensive analysis." Sarah felt ice in her veins. A research facility meant dissection, experimentation, vivisection. They were going to cut her apart to understand what made humans so dangerous. "How flattering," she said dryly. "When do I leave?" "Immediately. The transport is already prepared." As the guards secured her for transport, Sarah's hand found the hidden chip. Whatever the Nexus Protocol was, whatever risks it carried, she was running out of time to discover the truth. The research facility would be her death sentence, unless she could become something more than human before she arrived. The transport ship was smaller than the one that had brought her to Nexus Prime, designed for speed rather than comfort. As it prepared to depart, Sarah caught a glimpse of Marcus through one of the station's observation windows. He was watching the ship leave, his expression unreadable. Then, they were in hyperspace, racing toward whatever horrors awaited at the Council's research facility. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the weight of the chip, the promise and threat it represented. Soon, she would have to make a choice that would determine not just her fate, but possibly the future of human civilization. The only question was whether she had the courage to take the first step into an unknown future. In the darkness between stars, a single human woman carried the hopes and fears of 2 species, one struggling to survive, and one that had vanished eons ago but might yet rise again. The next few hours would determine which legacy would endure. The research facility designated as Theta 7 hung in the void like a predatory insect, all angles and sharp edges designed to inspire fear in those brought there against their will. Sarah pressed her face against the transport's small porthole and studied the structure with professional interest. Docking bays, defensive positions, what appeared to be multiple research wings extending from a central hub. She had maybe an hour before they arrived. An hour to decide whether to trust Marcus and activate the Nexus Protocol, or face whatever the Council's scientists had planned for her as an unenhanced human. The chip felt warm against her skin, as if it were alive and waiting. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had faced impossible odds before: the Titan expedition, the battle at Kepler Station, survival training on Europa's frozen wastes. But this was different. This wasn't about physical courage or tactical skill. This was about fundamentally changing what she was. "Ancient legacy," she whispered, pressing the chip to her temple. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the world exploded into light and sensation that transcended anything her brain had ever processed. Information flooded her mind, not just data, but understanding. The history of the Forerunners unfolded before her like a vast tapestry spanning millions of years. They had been explorers, builders, gardeners of galaxies. They had seeded countless worlds with life, guided the evolution of dozens of species, and built a network of quantum-linked artifacts that spanned the observable universe. But their greatest achievement was not their technology, it was their understanding of consciousness itself. Sarah saw how they had mapped the quantum structures that gave rise to awareness, how they had learned to enhance and expand the boundaries of what thinking beings could become. The Nexus Protocol wasn't just about making humans better soldiers or smarter scientists. It was about evolution itself, about the next step in the journey from matter to mind. But something had gone wrong. Sarah saw the end of the Forerunner civilization not in war or catastrophe, but in transcendence. They had evolved beyond physical existence, ascending to a higher plane of reality and leaving behind only their artifacts and their children, the countless species they had guided toward intelligence. Most of those species had developed along predictable paths, becoming exactly what the Forerunners had designed them to be. But a few had surprised their creators. They had developed traits, abilities, and potential that exceeded even Forerunner expectations. Humanity was one of those species. The protocol activated systems in Sarah's brain that had been dormant since birth. Neural pathways restructured themselves, quantum coherence fields aligned with her consciousness, and, suddenly, she could perceive dimensions of reality that had been invisible moments before. The ship around her was no longer just metal and circuitry. She could see the flow of energy through its systems, the quantum signatures of every component, the probability matrices that governed its movement through space. More than that, she could interact with them. Sarah reached out with her enhanced consciousness and touched the ship's navigation system. It was like sliding her hand into a glove that had been waiting for her all her life. The ship responded to her will as if it were an extension of her body. But, with the new abilities came new understanding, and what she learned filled her with both hope and terror. The Nexus Protocol was irreversible. She was no longer entirely human, but something between human and Forerunner. And if Marcus was right about the Council's fears, she was now exactly what they had been trying to prevent, a human with the potential to claim the Forerunner legacy. The transport shuddered as they approached the research facility. Sarah heard the guards preparing for arrival, their alien voices discussing the procedures for delivering their prisoner. They had no idea that their prisoner had just become something beyond their understanding. Sarah considered her options. She could use her new abilities to escape, but that would only confirm the Council's worst fears about humanity. It would justify their attempts to exterminate her species. Or she could allow herself to be captured and studied, learning more about the facility while looking for an opportunity to contact Marcus and coordinate a larger plan. The choice was made for her when alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The guards rushed toward the cockpit, shouting in their own languages. Through her enhanced perception, Sarah could see what was happening, multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace around the research facility. Human ships, but not like any she had ever seen. They moved with impossible grace, shifting and flowing through three-dimensional space as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions. Their hulls seemed to shift and change, adapting to incoming fire before it even reached them. And, at their head was a ship she recognized despite its radical modifications. The EDF Prometheus. Marcus had somehow rebuilt his ship, enhanced it with Forerunner technology, and come to rescue her. But, as she watched the battle unfold through the viewports, Sarah realized this wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a demonstration. The human ships didn't just defeat the facility's defenses, they dismantled them with surgical precision. Weapons platforms went offline without exploding. Shield generators powered down gracefully. The massive research station was disabled without a single loss of life. It was the kind of tactical perfection that could only come from enhanced humans working in perfect coordination with Forerunner technology. The transport ship's guards were in panic. Their weapons and communications had mysteriously malfunctioned, and they found themselves completely helpless as docking clamps locked onto their hull. When the airlock opened, 3 figures in advanced combat suits entered the ship. Sarah recognized the lead figure immediately, even through the suit's enhancements. Marcus had come for her personally. But, as he removed his helmet, Sarah saw that her earlier fears had been justified. This wasn't entirely the Marcus she had known. His eyes held depths that spoke of enhanced perception, and, when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of someone whose consciousness extended beyond the boundaries of normal human awareness. He had undergone the Nexus Protocol. "Hello, Sarah," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond normal hearing. "I see you've made your choice." "As have you," Sarah replied, studying his transformed features. How long? 6 months ago. The mission required it. Marcus gestured to the chaos around them. The enhanced humans under my command needed a leader who could truly understand their capabilities. The other two figures removed their helmets, revealing faces that were recognizably human but possessed of an otherworldly beauty. Their eyes held the same depth as Marcus's, and Sarah could feel the quantum fields that surrounded their enhanced consciousness. Lieutenant Nakamura, Marcus said, indicating the woman to his right. She was a pilot on the Mars defense grid. And Sergeant Williams, formerly of the Europa garrison. They volunteered for the protocol after seeing what we could accomplish. And the cost? Sarah asked, though she could already sense the answer through her own enhanced perception. We can never go back to Earth, Nakamura said simply. Enhanced humans can't coexist with baseline humans for extended periods. The quantum fields interfere with normal neural function. We're no longer entirely human, Williams added. But we're no longer limited by human weaknesses either. Sarah felt the truth of their words. Even now, standing in the same room as them, she could feel her consciousness reaching out to theirs, seeking connection and coordination that transcended normal communication. It was beautiful and terrifying. The research facility, Sarah said. What's your plan? We're going to liberate it, Marcus explained. Every alien species the Council has imprisoned for study, every experiment they've conducted, every piece of Forerunner technology they've hoarded, we're going to claim it all. And then? Marcus smiled, and it was both familiar and alien. Then, we're going to offer the galaxy a choice. Join us in exploring the Forerunner legacy, or continue down the path of stagnation and fear. The next few hours passed in a blur of coordinated action. The enhanced humans moved through the research facility like living lightning, their consciousness extended through the station's systems. They didn't fight the alien defenders so much as simply outthink them at every turn. Sarah found herself working in perfect harmony with the team, her enhanced abilities allowing her to interface with Forerunner security systems and open passages that had been sealed for millennia. The facility was far larger than she had realized, extending deep into the asteroid it was built upon. In the lower levels, they found horrors that would fuel nightmares for years to come. Thousands of beings from dozens of species, imprisoned and studied like laboratory animals. The Council's fear of Forerunner technology had driven them to desperate measures, and they had been dissecting anyone who showed signs of enhanced abilities. But they also found treasures beyond imagination. Forerunner artifacts that had been gathered from across the galaxy, devices and databases that contained the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had spanned millions of years. And, in the deepest vaults, they found the greatest prize of all. A complete Forerunner consciousness transfer matrix. This is it, Marcus breathed, standing before the crystalline structure that hummed with barely contained energy. This is how they ascended. The final step of the Nexus Protocol. Sarah stared at the matrix, feeling its quantum fields resonating with her enhanced consciousness. Through her new perception, she could see the pathways it offered, ways to transcend physical existence entirely, to become beings of pure thought and energy. The choice the Forerunners faced, she said slowly. Remain physical and limited, or transcend and leave everything behind. Most of them chose transcendence, Williams said. But some remained behind to guide their children. That's what the artifacts are, caretakers left to help evolving species when they're ready. Sarah understood now why the Council feared humanity so much. They weren't just afraid of humans becoming more powerful. They were afraid of humans following the Forerunner path to transcendence, leaving the current galactic powers behind. We don't have to make that choice now, Marcus said, reading her thoughts through their quantum link. We can take a different path. Build something new. What did you have in mind? Marcus gestured to the freed prisoners, the captured technology, the liberated knowledge. A new civilization. One that embraces enhancement rather than fearing it. One that explores the Forerunner legacy instead of hoarding it. And if the Council refuses to accept that? Then, they'll discover that humans are very good at war, especially when we're no longer limited by human weaknesses. The evacuation of the research facility took 3 days. Every prisoner was freed, every piece of technology catalogued and removed, every database copied and preserved. The enhanced humans worked with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural, their consciousness extended through quantum networks that allowed perfect coordination. When they were finished, the facility was empty but intact. Marcus had left a message for the Council, transmitted on every frequency and in every language they used. To the Galactic Council and all member species, humanity claims its inheritance. The Forerunner legacy belongs to all thinking beings, not to those who would hoard it out of fear. We offer partnership to any who would join us in exploring the mysteries of consciousness and evolution. But we will not be enslaved, dissected, or destroyed. We have chosen our path. Choose yours wisely. As their fleet prepared to depart, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and looked back at the research facility. Through her enhanced perception, she could see the quantum echoes of all the suffering that had taken place there, but also the hope radiating from the liberated prisoners. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "Home," Marcus said simply. "But not Earth. We're going to build something new. A place where enhanced and baseline humans can work together, where all species can explore their potential without fear." "The Council won't let us. The Council no longer has a choice in the matter." Sarah felt the truth of his words through their quantum link. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. Humanity had claimed its Forerunner inheritance, and nothing would ever be the same. As the fleet jumped to hyperspace, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From captured prisoner to enhanced human, from mourning a dead love to standing beside him as he reshaped the galaxy. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but she was no longer just human enough to be awed by it. She was something more. Something new. Something that carried the hopes of an ancient civilization and the dreams of a young species reaching for the stars. Behind them, the research facility sent its automated distress signal into the void, carrying news that would soon reach every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had returned to the galactic stage, not as supplicants or victims, but as inheritors of a legacy millions of years in the making. The war was far from over, but its nature had fundamentally changed. This was no longer a conflict between species, but between philosophies. Between those who embraced evolution and those who feared it. Between those who would transcend their limitations and those who would cling to familiar cages. Humanity had made its choice. Now the rest of the galaxy would have to make theirs. In the vast darkness between stars, enhanced humans worked with quantum computers to plan their new civilization. They carried within their consciousness the memories of ancient explorers and the dreams of future transcendence. They were the bridge between what had been and what could be. And, at their heart were two humans who had found each other across impossible odds, who had chosen love and duty over safety and comfort, and who now stood ready to guide their species toward a destiny that would echo through eternity. The capture of Sarah Chen had been intended to provide the Council with insight into human capabilities. Instead, it had catalyzed the transformation of humanity into something the galaxy had never seen before. The age of baseline humanity was ending. The age of transcendence had begun.